Okay, let me share my screen here and do the slideshow. Okay, why are you not from beginning? There we go. Okay, so I am the director of the Wanaque Public Library, or small community up in northern New Jersey in Passaic County, and we serve about 11,500 residents in our community. Just a note, the community where I work, Wanaque Borough, actually includes two towns with separate zip codes, Wanaque on the northern end and Haskell on the south end, closer to Route 287. So you might hear me refer to both. In 2022, I applied for this community history grant because I wanted to learn more about preserving local history and also develop stronger connections between the library and the community we serve. What drew me to the grant was that it included free training, frankly, and it was exploratory. I didn't have to have a well thought out project. They were going to help us develop a project that would work for us, our small library. And I actually remember exactly how we settled on this project. I was sitting in my office with my friend and library trustee, Kathy Riccardelli, who is here on this call. And we were talking about some possible ideas. And she said, you know, what really changed this community was when Route 287 came through. And I had never really thought of that because it's always been here in my memory. But it was only 30 years ago that the last leg of Route 287 went from Montville all the way up to the New York border. So I'm actually kind of geeky and I like transportation infrastructure. So I was really intrigued by this idea. It isn't something that we give much thought to. It's just there and we take it for granted. It's how we get to where we're going. But when 287 was being built, the last leg, and then when the Wanaque exit was built, exit 55, it was pretty disruptive to the community. It's like, imagine somebody building a big house next to you and it just goes on for years. So even though it was 30 years ago when the last leg of 287 went through, and then 27 years ago when we got exit 55, there are a lot of people in the community who still remember it. So I worked with Catherine Miller, who's a Rutgers University senior with a concentration in public history. And we developed a short survey that asked people to share their memories and thoughts. And then we did some oral history interviews. We were also really fortunate to have access to the good old Haskell Facebook group. This was a great source. This is people who are interested in local history in Wanaque, Haskell, and this area. People who no longer live here, people who've lived here a long time. So that was a great resource. One of the things I found most frustrating about this was I also felt like I was going down a lot of rabbit holes, and it was great. And we wanted to talk to all the people, and we wanted to get all the stories, but realistically, with the time frame and the amount of money we had, we just couldn't do it. So Route 287 was originally conceived as part of Dwight D. Eisenhower's 1956 Interstate Highway Act, which was during the Cold War. And his plan was to create a system of superhighways across the United States, partially as a way to ensure that supplies and troops would be able to move rapidly throughout the country in case of an enemy attack. Construction of Route 287 began in Somerset County in 1953, and by 1973, the highway was open all the way from the New Jersey Turnpike in Somerset County to Montville in Morris County. The final leg of 287 from Montville up to Mahwah was not completed until November of 1993. So long before we began this project, there were people on the good old Haskell Facebook group who were reminiscing together about what it was like when 287 was being built and then when the exit was put in. So I just want to share some of their comments. Guy named Scott said, when they were building 287, I had to practice emergency landings there. I didn't actually land, but I had to come in with no power and then add power and pull up at 500 feet. Woman named Nancy, I remember riding through Haskell on Route 287 for the first time, probably around 1994. The Wanaque exit was not there yet. The view was amazing. We were seeing Haskell as we had never seen it before. My mom was so excited as we had waited probably 28 years for this highway. We just drove up and down the highway about 6 times. Paul said, I remember the first time I drove over the completed 287 highway, getting to see these lands for the first time. If it weren't for the sign that said entering Wanaque Borough, I would have never guessed where I was. It was like being in another world. And finally, John says, I remember being in school at Haskell Elementary and hearing the blasting as they carved the way for 287. So when the last leg opened in 1993, Route 287 passed over the intersection of Ringwood Avenue and Union Avenue, but there was no exit in Wanaque, so residents still needed to go south to Bloomingdale or north to Ringwood to get on the highway. So once the last leg was open, then there was a lot of local agita about where to put the exit in Wanaque. And there were a lot of newspaper articles about unhappy parties on either side talking about it and arguing about it. Originally, the Passaic County freeholders and also the town leaders wanted a new exit to be constructed a little bit north of Ringwood Avenue, and they had a developer lined up to put in what would have then been the largest mall in New Jersey. So that would have really been interesting. But the Department of Transportation said, look, we have the environmental impact studies done for the Ringwood Avenue exit. It would take years to get these studies again. So we're going to go with the Ringwood Avenue exit. And after the Ringwood exit was finalized, the developer pulled out of the deal. But people were telling me, boy, it could have been really interesting. So, according to a 1982 study by the Department of Transportation, there were 14 families and 18 businesses in Wanaque who would be displaced by the development of the final 19-mile stretch and the building of Exit 55. And one of those families whose land was bought for the 287 project was the D. Cantaneo family, or the D family, as everyone called them, because nobody could actually pronounce their last name. So in 1993, they were featured in this article in the Bergen Record. And after we advertised that we were working on this project, I got a call from somebody named Lisa Taylor, who said, my grandfather owned the land where 287 exit was put in. We had a salvage yard, there was a gas station, and there were a couple of apartment buildings there. My grandparents lived in a house on the property, and I spent my first 3 years living there. I have a scrapbook. Would you like to see it? And we were like, yes. It was so fascinating. So then I looked back, and what you're seeing here are tax records from 1935, which we have in our archive collection. And the D family had bought this property in 1932. And back in 2019, one of his grandchildren posted on the Good Old Haskell Facebook page saying, my grandfather owned what is now Exit 55 on Route 287. Does anyone have any stories to tell? And a lot of other members remembered. And one of the comments was, my mom was friends with your grandmother. We would bring your grandfather rice pudding from the diner and he would eat it in the yard. My family rented from them for years. Great people. Johnny taught me how to drive in the junkyard. We rented an apartment from them when I was pregnant with my son. Your grandmother would come and check on us every day and would bring bags of grapes because my son loved them. These are a couple of pages from Lisa's scrapbook that she made for her family about, this was actually the John D. Cantano the first. He's the one that bought the land in 1932. And this is his wife, Dorothy, on the left. And they had a lot of happy memories there. Lisa was in her early 20s when the state bought the land to put the new interchange in. And she remembers that it was very upsetting at the time. And she says she wasn't sure if her father ever got over it, but in the end, she feels like the Route 287 exit turned out to be a good thing for the community because it improved access to the highway and made it much easier for us to connect to the rest of the state and to the world at large. So looking here on the top photo, you'll see, you can see Route 287 looming over. This photo was probably taken in 1994 through 1995. The exit to Wanaque is not here yet, so you can still see the signs for the D salvage yard. And I want you to take a look at this sign here with the yellow. That actually says D Street. That was the street that went onto the property. I think it was about 7 acres. There was the salvage yard. There were a couple of houses and a couple of apartment complexes. This photo below is after the property was bought and they were actually in the process of constructing the exit 55. So one of the things that is really cool that I learned is that Lisa and her cousins all still live nearby. And so if you take a look, this is what I took this picture yesterday. I was coming off the exit heading to work. There's a tiny little sign on the side of Route 287 that looks like a highway sign. And this is a sign that the family created. It looks like a highway sign, so nobody's going to pay attention to it. And they look at it every time they drive by, and you can see it says Gramps on D Street, Haskell, New Jersey. So once you know the story, I'll never forget that story. It's their private joke, a way to honor their grandfather and remember the good times they had at the salvage yard with their grandparents when they were growing up. So, yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I do just want to mention that we're pretty far over time. So if you have a, yeah.
Okay, so I had a conclusion, but I can stop with, I can.
No, feel free to wrap up your comments. I just wanted to make sure everyone has time. Okay. Apologies and thank you.
I'll try to speak really fast. So when we began the project, we didn't have any information in our local history archives about this important piece of our community's history. And so the project allowed us to learn about this part of the history of the town that isn't visible. When I was growing up, I learned that if something is important, then somebody's going to write about it, and that's how I can learn about it. But that's just not true. History is messy and colorful, and it involves people and emotions and personalities. And there's an incredible amount of hidden history out there just waiting to be discovered. So then I started thinking, is hidden history or community history less important than the quote official history we learn about in textbooks? I don't think it is. And frankly, it's very much more interesting to me than what I would actually read in the textbook. So I do want to say thank you to my collaborators, Kathy Riccardelli and Catherine Miller, our intern from Rutgers, and many thanks to the staff of New Jersey Council for the Humanities and to you, Kristen, for giving us a lot of guidance.
Thank you so